So welcome everyone. We're up to 560 attendees, which is just so amazing. I really feel a deep connection to everyone and just so much gratitude to you both, Robin and Cami, for joining us and also crossing time zones to be here with us from the States. So I so appreciate that. I'm going to, for everyone listening, I'm going to hand over this session to these two amazing people to take on. But before I do that, I just wanted to, first of all, start where we've been starting with these webinars for the last few weeks together. And it feels really nice to start this way, well, for me anyway, and it helps me regulate myself, which is to take a collective breath. I think to access our learning and connection in these times, taking breath and a pause is one way we can settle in. So first of all, I invite you perhaps to move yourself around on your chair or do something that might make you 5 to 10% more comfortable for the next 90 minutes. And then I'm going to invite you, if you wanted to join, to take a breath in and out with me. So I'm going to take a breath in and a breath out. Thank you. And I wanted to acknowledge country as well. So for those of you joining from Australia, there's 500 nations that make up this beautiful country of ours. And I'm currently sitting and joining you from Wathaurong country in Victoria. And I'm so deeply grateful to be able to be on this land and at these moments of time really needing the seas, the trees and the breeze to feel connected. So I wanted to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land, and I invite you to reflect briefly on the land that you're standing on and that we meet today. So drum roll, here we are. This is just a phenomenal turnout and times to, I guess, to be able to meet online and to hear and to be guided by you both. So I'm just going to do a bio and then I'm just going to handball over to you. So Robin, you really don't need any introduction. I think we all follow your work religiously. I'm definitely fangirling right now. And as I was saying to Robin before, I was earlier eating my breakfast and looking through his 54-page CV, which is just truly phenomenal, and comparing to my sad 2-page CV. So for over 35 years, Robin McWilliam has been investigating how to best help young children with disabilities and their families. Robin McWilliam is a professor in special education and multiple abilities at the University of Alabama, where he founded and directs the Evidence-Based International Early Intervention Office. It's a mouthful. His research interests are child engagement, family-centred practices, and models of service delivery. His routines-based model is implemented in 10 countries, and Robin can often be found there sampling local food and drink. And Cami, thank you so much for joining us, Cami. So Cami Stevenson is an administrator with the Multnomah, am I saying it right? Wonderful. Early childhood program in Portland, which is implementing the routines-based model. Cami is the Associate Director of the Routines-Based Interview Certification Institute, the Routines-Based Home Visiting Certification Institute, and the Collaborative Consultation to Children's Classroom Certification Institute. Wow, I haven't had enough coffee for these tongue-tied twisters. Cami coaches early childhood professionals from all disciplines in practices in the routine-based model. Cami is co-authoring the 2nd edition of Routines-Based Early Intervention, published by Brooks Publishing. Whoa, that was a mouthful. Welcome, both of you. So as I mentioned earlier, there's a chat function for everybody, all the attendees, the 600 of us joining. Please feel free to comment and pop any questions in there. We'll be looking at it sort of throughout the time and weaving those questions in. And that's it from me. I've got nothing else to say. I'm going to handball over to you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for that very kind introduction, Anna. Am I assuming that everybody can see me okay? And hear me? Okay. So thank you very much for ECIA. I have a long history with Early Childhood Intervention Australia. I've presented at many workshops and conferences there. One of the best conferences that I've ever participated in was actually organized by Denise Luscombe in Perth. Many of you probably know that conference a few years ago. That was the ECIA National Conference. And I am very grateful to the owners of the land of the various parts of Australia, since this is basically a national and even international webinar. I have to be respectful and thankful to people from all over, the Indigenous people of Australia from all over. My work in Australia has actually been quite significant in that I work very closely with a very large program in Victoria. You will know it as Noah's Ark. I also work with Denise Luscombe in Perth. And so my work with Australia has been profound and significant. This webinar is with Cami Stevenson, as Anna has introduced her. And this is an important partnership that Cami and I have, because my work is research-based and theoretical, and also involved in a lot of training and practice. But Cami's is very much rooted in the application of practices that are evidence-based and that work really well with families. And as you'll see, the theme that we're going to be talking about today is about how moving to a telepractice approach, which we have to do because of the stay-at-home orders, for people who follow the routines-based model is actually not that big of a change from what we would have done face-to-face anyway. And Cami can address that from a practical standpoint. When she introduces herself, you'll hear some more about this, but she works with a program that serves hundreds, even thousands of families. And the changes that we've had to make in this new era really point to the application of the routines-based model and how it can work in this era of using technology. Cami and I have worked together for many years now. She's my right-hand person in the what we like to call the routines-based model enterprise. And you'll see that we have many common experiences that we can bring to bear to this issue. I will say at this point that almost daily I'm seeing that there are many people who are really rising to the occasion to try to help with early intervention, birth through 5, sometimes through 6, to adapt to the current environment of telepractice. Every day, more people are showing us what it is that we can do. And so in some ways, I feel that we are just sort of adding on to what other people are doing. I will say that the routines-based model, which we're going to be talking about today, does have some specific practices that might be particularly helpful as you're working with families from a distance. But I'm really proud of my colleagues from around the world. I have colleagues who have developed materials in the United States, Poland, Paraguay, Spain, who have been developing practices or providing guidance, really, about how to work with families through technology. A number of these people are people who are adopting the routines-based model or who have practices that are very similar to the routines-based model. In today's webinar, we are going to talk about practices. We're going to be using a webinar that was actually developed for use in Spain. It is currently being subtitled, even though I actually can speak Spanish, it's just not good enough, so they have to subtitle it. So we will be playing a webinar and then stopping it and talking about it and trying to apply it to the Australian context. And to that point, I do want to say that when Cami and I use the terms early interventionist or PSP, standing for primary service provider, that's the same as in Australia, you know as the key worker. So sometimes I forget to use the Australian terms. So when I use early intervention, I sometimes forget to use early childhood intervention, but I think we're all on the same page when it comes to that. So Anna gave a way too generous introduction of me, referring to my lengthy CV. But at this point, I would like to let Cami talk a little bit about what her perspective is. As Anna mentioned, Cami is an administrator at the Multnomah Early Childhood Program in Portland, Oregon. But Cami, perhaps you could tell people a little bit about your perspective as an administrator, a trainer, and a coach.
Thank you, Robin, and thank you all for the introduction and getting us started and for this great opportunity. Like Robin has mentioned, this is the biggest change for us have been the details, such as technology, starting the work from home, managing different pieces of life that we didn't have to do before. So what I really appreciate what Robin was mentioning is that we're not having to change our practice. We're having to make adjustments of our practices. I think this is really timely that we get this opportunity to share how our program, we have over 150 staff, over 3,000 families, and we hit the ground running without too many problems. So I'm looking forward to sharing more of our experience as we go through today's webinar.
Okay, thank you, Cami. So now I'm going to move us into how the principles of the routines-based model match the demands of distance service delivery. And I'm going to share my screen to do this. Okay. Let me just say at this point that at any time, please do put questions into the chat column, and Cami and Anna and others will be monitoring the questions that show up in the chat room. Okay, so let me, I might have to adjust the volume on this in just a second, but I'm going to play part of this webinar that we have already presented for Spain and Australianize it, or as you would say, Australianize it for you. At www.eiei.edu, where you will find many resources. Is it loud enough? The principles of the routines-based model. First, all the intervention occurs between visits. Not during visits, but between visits. That's where it is that children are learning. And if that's the case, then... Let me just stop there for a second. Cami, is that loud enough?
It's a little quiet. Do you have any more volume?
No.
I think it's manageable.
It's manageable, okay. What do we do during visits? What we do during visits is we help the families have all the information and support that they need to be able to intervene or parent their child. So visits build the family's capacity to meet child and family needs. And so in the tele-intervention visit, we're still going to be doing that that emphasis on building families' capacity. Another principle of the routines-based model is that the family sets the agenda. The professional does not prepare for what they think we should talk about at the next visit. You will see some more details about that as we go along. The next steps form, which I'll show you later, is virtually completed and reviewed during visits. That is, we can ask the family what it is that they intend to do in the coming week and what they would like the focus of the next visit to be on. And then at the beginning of the next virtual visit, we review that. Family sets the agenda. Another principle is that parents are competent adults. So understanding that is true, we then in a virtual world collaborate to determine interventions that parents will carry out. We do not give families homework. We work with them to help them decide what it is that they want to be able to do with their child. And of course, we give them ideas once we have enough context. Another principle of the RBM is that that family consultation is how we work with families. Family consultation is collaborative consultation, but with families. So we ask many questions to help families arrive at solutions that they want to implement. We ask many questions before we make a suggestion so that our suggestions are relevant for the family. Another principle of the model is the two-bucket principle. This principle says that a mother or father or other caregiver can only fill her child's bucket to the extent that her bucket is full. That is to say that we need to ensure that caregivers of children have the information, support, resources that they need so that then they have the energy, information, and resources to be able to help their child. So the visit, the virtual visit, includes discussion of family outcomes and goals and other family needs. In this family-centered approach, the routines-based model, we are concerned about helping all members of the family, understanding that a family is like a child's mobile, that you tug on one element of the mobile and all the other elements move with it. Families are a system that is interdependent on each other. The last principle I want to mention is that we provide support-based visits. This has been true in a face-to-face world and is also true in a virtual world. And so our visits are designed to provide emotional support for families and ensure that they have emotional support from their own networks, to provide material support to families, that is information about how they can have access to the things that they need to be able to run their lives the way they want to, and importantly, that they have informational support. So these three types of support, emotional, material, and informational support, are essential at every visit, and we can provide those when we're using tele-intervention. So, Cami, when we think about these principles that I've just been talking about, how is this different from what we're training, for example, providers in your program or in other places to do face-to-face? Are there any differences in virtual service delivery?
I think the North Star that we keep as our primary focus when I'm working with my team, ensuring that we're not getting lost in any of the complications or differences or problems that people are facing. We just keep going back to the principle of providing the three different ways, or providing the three types of supports. So as Robin was mentioning, that emotional support is so crucial right now. We are that friendly face. It's a routine that the home visit or the virtual visit now is something that they're familiar with. They parents have something to hold on to, knowing that they have that weekly contact with a provider or a key worker. And the pieces of the emotional support that Robin has always taught us is the profs. So we always want to be very positive with the families. So not only are we showing up for them and being that present in their life, but continuing to stay positive even through these challenging times, but also being responsive to what is going on with the family. As Robin was mentioning, not having our own agenda or coming in with thinking that we know what's going to be on the call or on the agenda for today, but being able to quickly shift gears and address whatever is happening with the family at that time. We want to make sure that we are orientated to the whole family, as we know that all kids are home from school right now. So it might have been just the parent and the little one, but now we've got the second grader, and we need to make sure that we're orientated to the whole family. Being able to just be friendly and continue to build that rapport and having that connection. And then lastly is being sensitive. We all are going through our own challenges of living in a new routine and developing new routines. And so we just need to remember to walk in another person's shoes. We don't know what they're going through. And so again, this is where we really, anytime I feel like my team is floundering or feeling like I don't know if I'm helping or doing anything, I bring them back to these three types of support that we can provide. I just reviewed emotional, but the other thing that we are finding right now is under material support, people are still needing support with where they might find a food box that they're able to access when things are shut down like this, or childcare for the frontline workers has been a challenge for some of our families. And then even, we like to say that we bring out the eco map that we'll talk about later. We whip out the eco map to see what kind of informal supports that a family might have, but those are limited right now because they cannot, call up the neighbor to have them come over, or be able to rely on some of those informal supports that they might be able to outside of the situation we're in. And then lastly, informational support, the type of intervention that we provide. And those are those typical things that a lot of our visits, usually most of our visits in person cover. The parents wanting to know information about child development, like what their child might be doing or what comes next, resources in general, including services for children, and then information about the child's disability. And lastly, again, what we spend a lot of our time in intervention visits are what to do with the child. What kind of supports or interventions can we be working on? So those are the big things that I think have been what is different for us is that sometimes it's just a little bit more of, the typical, we come into the home and we start talking with the parents, but now we just really focus on these are the things to keep in mind.
That's really good because I think going through the details of emotional, material, and informational support, this is what we would have done in regular visits. And so I think this is making the point that on virtual visits, we are still following the same principles, still providing the same types of supports to families. And in a minute, we'll get into some of the differences, but if you are following a good family-centered and functional approach, it really is not that different from what we would have done face-to-face. In fact, some of us are now talking about the fact that the current situation might actually be helping people to understand the really good and useful way of working with families. So thank you, Cami. I'm going to go back to sharing the screen now. And I'll play some more from our existing webinar. Okay, here we go. I don't need to tell you about all the technological requirements for doing tele-intervention, because there are many, many resources out there now in the past 2 to 3 weeks telling people what they need in terms of Wi-Fi, enough bandwidth, the right kind of technology, etc. So I'm more or less going to skip over that, other than to tell you that the most commonly tele-intervention visits will be via video conferencing. So with some kind of camera involved. It can be by phone, and this has become a very important issue because we understand that for reasons of equity, we cannot have early intervention that can only go to people who have their own personal Wi-Fi, because there are some families who do not have that. So in this spirit, there are organizations and states scrambling to provide Wi-Fi to all families, such as by providing them with hotspots that they can use through their cellular connections and so forth. So VidCons are all great and comfortable. As I said earlier, I'm not going to go into the details of all of these issues. I really want to talk about how the routines-based model can be used successfully via teleconference. Okay, so Cami, back to some of your experiences now. What have you been hearing about programs being able to reach all families? What have been some of the main challenges on the technological front? We don't need to spend a lot of time on this because we really want to focus on the good practices that we actually can do through technology. But at the same time, I do want to acknowledge that there have been some technology issues and equity issues.
I think some of the top concerns that we've had, there's still some families that we have not been able to reach despite trying all different modes of texting, email, or phone calls. The other concern we have is that we think that because of not being able to reach them, that they're probably feeling a little overwhelmed or by trying to juggle. We have working families that are working at home now, juggling older siblings in the house, new routines, things that I already mentioned. Some we've got problems with limited technology. They might have a computer in the house, but the parents need it for their work, or the older child needs it for their schooling. And so there is not the opportunity for to be able to use it for visits. We use interpreters for our home visits, and our language banks, the places we get interpreters from, are overwhelmed, and they are not being able to work with us during our typical home visits. So we're having to really modify that, find other people in the home, the older sibling, anybody that possibly could help out. And then I think the last one would be the just overall tech challenges some of our families as well as providers face. iPhones and Androids still don't talk well to each other. And so trying to figure out how to walk a parent through a different carrier than what maybe we have. So those are the top ones.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So that's a good reminder that the technology problems don't just rest with families, they also rest with professionals who we all range in our expertise with technology, and as you mentioned, Cami, the different types of technology that a family and a provider might have. They might be different. Okay, so let's talk now, get into some of the practices. So a hallmark of the routines-based model is the routines-based interview, which many people in Australia have now been trained to do. And we continue to offer training, especially through Noah's Ark Incorporated in Victoria. So let's talk a little bit about the routines-based interview. One of the first elements of the routines-based model is the routines-based interview for assessing needs. And Cami Stevenson and I will be doing a webinar on this hosted by CEC and DEC in a couple of weeks. So So the RBI is essential, and it includes eco-map development. So that is drawing the picture of the family's ecology, including, especially importantly, their informal supports. And this can be done by just asking the family questions. The professional will draw the eco-map and then use technology to show the family the eco-map, such as by scanning it and sending a copy to the family. Scanning can be used with various types of software on telephones, or it can be simply a picture that is then sent to the family. So obviously we have to have, in addition to the teleconference connection, we have to have some kind of connection with the family via text or email or some other system like that, Facebook Messenger or whatever. Those other methods of connection are important for setting up the visit. I do want to say that I have seen some guidances around televisits that to me sound much too prescriptive for working with families. Our visits should be a gentle intrusion into the family's life because they want us to be there because we're helpful to them. It is not that the family has to bend over backwards to accommodate our visits through technology. So ensure that the setup for the visits is gentle and kind and sensitive to the fact that families are stuck together in their homes, and some families are feeling isolated and some families are feeling that there's too much intrusion in their lives. So we need to be really sensitive not to make it that the families have to bend to us, but that we accommodate the families' schedules. So the eco-map is the first part of the RBI. Then we get into the interview itself about the child's engagement, independence, and social relationships in the different routines of the day. This happens in face-to-face as a conversation. So there's no reason it cannot happen through a computer. And the procedures for doing an RBI basically are that we go through the family's day. At each time of the day or routine, we find out what everyone else is doing, what the child is doing, the child's engagement, child's independence, the child's social relationships, and then how satisfied the family is with that time of the day. And we proceed that way through the interview. Towards the end of the interview, we do ask the family the time, worry, and change questions, which are, do you have enough time for yourself or yourself and another person? When you lie awake at night worrying, what do you worry about? And if there's anything you could change in your life, what would you change? And those questions still get asked, because just because we're doing it over a computer, that doesn't really make any difference. It's very important, in my opinion, to have the camera on the interventionist and the family so that you can, to some extent, read affect in both people. And it's very important for the family to be able to see the affect in their interviewer. Then the interviewer recaps the conversation. Now, the notes can be taken by hand or they can be taken on the computer. Usually in face-to-face, computer-taken notes don't work all that well because it's a lot to handle when you're to keep up with well-written notes and to keep the conversation going. It's a little easier from a distance to do that, so people have a choice of taking their notes either way. In the recap, they need to show their notes to the family. So again, we either have to use scanning or pictures for the family, or we share our screen, or some combination of the two, because you can actually capture the image of your notes and share the screen from that image. So the point is that the family needs to be able to see the notes during the recap, because they're going to revisit the notes a little bit later on. After the recap, the family then chooses, there's the recap, and they decide what their goals are going to be. At this point, at the beginning, that we just ask them what goals they want, and the professional starts writing down what the family wants and maybe asking for a little bit of clarification to make sure that these informal goals have enough, that we have enough information about these informal goals to know what the family really wants. If the family has chosen fewer than 10, which is usually true, we then hand over our notes to the family. So in a virtual way, this would be making sure that the family could see the images of the handwritten notes or could see the typed notes through shared screen or through a copy, some other method of sending a copy, such as saving a document of the notes and sending it to the family so they can look through it. Now, the important thing here is that the family should be able to see these notes and add additional goals that they hadn't thought about, goals or outcomes. And then the professional and the family together should be able to look at the notes. Each person can have his or her own copy, or with a shared screen, they can both see these notes, so that we end up with 10 to 12 10 to 12 outcomes or goals, some of which are functional child goals and some of which are family goals. Okay, so that was an overview of how to do the ECOMAP and RBI routines-based interview, including goal decision-making, which is one of the main points of doing a routines-based interview, so that the goals that are decided for early childhood intervention are based on children's needs for functioning in daily routines and on families' needs. So at the time I recorded this, it was a couple of weeks ago, but actually this webinar tomorrow for the Division for Early Childhood and the Council for Exceptional Children is actually tomorrow. So Cami, what specific adaptations that we're thinking about for the RBI, which is the topic of tomorrow's webinar, have I not mentioned? Can you think of anything that we should think about for technology?
I think only if you are going to be short of the recommended 2 hours set aside for an RBI. We always talk about digging deep. So really asking enough questions that you could picture the whole time of day happening like you were a fly on the wall. You could just see it as a movie. So that's what we mean by digging deep in each time of day. And if you have time constraints, you still want to dig deep, but maybe it's not as far or not as many times of the day, instead of just getting surface level information throughout the whole day. I think that is one of the only adaptations or modifications we're finding that sometimes needs to occur.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because some people have told me that whereas a live conversation can go on for 2 hours quite quickly, that on screen or on the computer or on the phone, that can be quite a long time. It feels longer. And so we've always said that when you're doing an RBI and digging deeper, the way I show it is like this, it's more important to dig deep into a few routines than to just do a shallow conversation across a number of routines. Yeah, that's a very good point. And that rule still holds. It's dig deep into a few routines. Don't just try to cover a whole bunch of routines just because you're doing it through technology. The other thing I was thinking about while I was listening to myself in this is that I was making the assumption that it was going to be done through video conferencing, and we always have to remember that there may be some families that were doing all of this through telephone or without video. And so that things like sharing the notes and things like that might be a little clunkier. but we have to be ready before the call to be to know whether we can email people documents, whether we can share screens and so forth, because there may be some families that it's just a simple telephone call. But the good news is that the routines-based interview can be done through a phone call. It's just a little clunkier at the end when it comes to the recap and goal decision making, but it can still happen. You agree, Cami?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Let's go back to our content here. Now, there have been a number of very good things posted on the internet for how to provide tele-intervention, tele-visits, tele-coaching, anything that you want to add on the end. And so I really do recommend that you look at the really good ones. I think Dathan Rush and his team at the Family, Infant and Preschool program have some excellent guidance on how to do visits through technology. Julianne Woods has the Family Guided Routines-Based Intervention, and her program, her methods called SOOPR, SSOOPPRR, are very good. And so there are a number of guidances out there. And some of these professionals are very consistent with the routines-based model. And so I'm going to talk a little bit here about routines-based home visits. Now, then we get into visits. In my blog, my blog post, I have described the difference between synchronous versus asynchronous visits. And I will say that most people are talking about only synchronous visits, that is real-time visits, which are ideal. But it is also possible to have asynchronous visits, which is basically the professional providing some ideas and feedback perhaps on material that the family has sent, such as video or questions by email or what have you. And so I don't want us to lose track of the possibility that sometimes asynchronous visits might also be an option. Okay, so most of the visits are going to be synchronous, but since I mentioned my blog entry there, let me let you know where you can find that. So are you ready to write this down? Because I don't have it written down anywhere on this presentation here. It's naturalenvironments.blogspot.com. Let me repeat that. naturalenvironments.blogspot.com. And there I have written a blog entry about tele-intervention. It has gone absolutely bloody viral. So you absolutely have to go check it out so that you increase the number of hits that it gets and makes it look even more viral. Okay, continuing now. I have also already mentioned that the agenda for the visits, and I'm now talking about synchronous visits, should be set by the family and with the family's priorities in mind. The focus of the visit is determined as part of the next steps form, which I'll show you in a minute. And then we review interventions that the family said that they were going to carry out. This review of the interventions that they were going to do, the ways to help the child be engaged, can involve some action, such as they could show you over with the camera what the child is doing. They could also show you what they have been doing to help the child. Often we have to remind the family that the positioning of their camera should be often capturing both child and caregiver, not just the child. The development of strategies with families has always involved a lot of talking, questions by the professional, and once the professional has enough context, understands what the family wants, understands what the child has been doing, what the caregiver has been doing, etc., then they stick the landing, as Cami Stevenson always calls it. And so that is actually comes up with a specific suggestion for the family. And then they talk about whether that's going to be feasible, whether the family likes that idea, and if not, they move on to another one. So that still can all happen through telecommunication. And then the... Yeah.
Robin, would you, we got a question of what about video recording a difficult time of day to watch with the provider and the parent? Would you
perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the great advantages of our being able to use technology now is the other way around, which is the family being able to show us what's going on with the child, as well as what they're doing with the child. So the lesson that we've really learned about this is that when families want to show us what's going on with the child, we want them to position the camera, whatever they're using, their phone or their tablet, laptop, whatever they're using, to record the situation in a way that we can see what the child is doing as well as what the caregiver is doing with the child. So that way we can give them, we can ask them more questions to find out what they're doing, why they're doing it, how it's been working, and so on, and build up strategies with them. So that's a very good use of the technology from the home to us. Was that your question?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
That was the question.
That was the question. Okay. All right. Good. Let me see if there's anything more on this. Visit needs to conclude with a plan for the next visit. Because we are working with 10 to 12 outcomes or goals, we use the matrix to remind the family of the goals that they have chosen, so in case they want to focus on certain ones that maybe we haven't talked about in a while. So, Cami, we did just a minute ago talk about the action, the demonstration of what the child is doing and what the caregiver is doing. But we sometimes have caregivers who, not caregivers, providers, key workers, who might say, how can I possibly do any good with virtual visits when I can't be doing hands-on with the child, especially demonstrating for the family? So how have you dealt with that with your many providers who have different philosophies and levels of training and so on?
Well, you can reassure everyone out there that those that are more understanding and on board with the model and what we're doing have had very little trouble than those who have done maybe some more direct drill work or practice with the child themselves, as opposed to trying to collaborate with a caregiver on doing it themselves. So the things that I'm coaching them to try is to remember again some of those key principles of who gets to set the agenda for the home visit. And maybe, again, as I was mentioning earlier, maybe the agenda is to talk about something that's going on with the older sibling, or something that really cool happened in the household and that they had been wanting to share with somebody. So, and then I again bring them back to collaboration as opposed to the expert model. We're not here to spoon feed them what to do. We need to keep in mind of the whole family situation of what's going on and come up with something that they believe might work, that's feasible in this day and time that we're in, There's always the opportunity to be able to do what we just got done talking about, as far as showing a little clip or talking about something that happened and trying to problem solve through what could we do next time, or what could we do in this situation. And then I really, again, bring them back to that 2-bucket principle that Robin was mentioning earlier. Just being that that person in the family's life right now. Yeah, I think that those are the biggest North Stars we go back to.
Yeah. So when I hear you talking about that, it's almost as though in some ways we could have been talking about when we were doing regular old face-to-face visits. Many of the same behaviors, practices, and principles still apply. I think in talking to you over the last couple of weeks about the situation that we're in now, I think that the emotional load on providers as well as families, it brings an added element to our work now. But the good news is that the routines-based model was always attuned to the emotional element of our interaction with families. That, it's easy for people to say it's all early intervention, birth through 5, is all about relationships. Yeah, it is about that, but not a lot of models necessarily actually put that into practice. The routines-based model has always emphasized the importance of emotional support to families, as you were mentioning earlier on, and that I think the importance of that emotional support has increased as families have additional emotional loads, and as key workers also have their own family emotional loads, trying to do their work and school their children, perhaps, partners who are out of work, all of those things. So our model is not perfectly positioned, because who would have anticipated all of this, but it's better positioned than the sort of medical model therapeutic approach would have been.
Yes,
Yep.
and I think that this has been a great opportunity for some of those people to learn some new skills. One of my favorite sayings that you said is that you can't just bring the clinic and dump it on the living room floor and assume that it's all going to work. So, we're flexing some new muscles.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Did I say that?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, I said that. Okay, let me talk a little bit about the matrix, because this could be very important in our
this is an
approach.
example of the matrix.
Okay, share your screen.
Oh, sorry, forgot. Share. Oh, wait a minute. Can you see the matrix?
No.
Okay.
Can see
there. Yeah, I know. I shared the wrong screen. Share. Now can you see it?
Yes.
Okay.
Have the goals or outcomes down the left-hand side, routines across the right. If the X's are the routines in which the functional child goal is targeted for. So in this one, which is acknowledging people when they greet Jamal, the family had, and the early interventionists had thought that this would be important at waking up time, hanging out time, and outside time, for example. So you can see how each of the goals has the routines that it is targeted for. Some of these goals don't have any routines here, and because they are the family goals, which are not routine bound. So this is Shamika will get information about inclusive preschool options. That is her outcome number 7. By the way, at the end of the RBI, once families have chosen their goals, they put them into priority order of importance, and then we always keep that order when we list out the goals. So Their most important one was for Jamal to acknowledge people when they greet him. And you can see that their goals go all the way down to Shamika exploring going back to work. And again, that has no routines because it's a family level goal. And here is the next steps form. This is a very important form for us.
Cami, did you want to say anything about the matrix, or should we just move on to the NSF?
I think that we can move on to the NSF.
Okay.
Other models have similar forms. This, for us, what we have on the left-hand panel is what we did today and progress on any goals discussed. In the right-hand panel, what we will do from now until the next visit, we being the caregiver, but it could also be the early interventionist. And the plan for the next visit is down at the bottom. And what we often do is show the family the matrix to remind them of all of the goals that they have chosen for their child and family when they are thinking about what the plan for the next visit should be.
Robin?
So the steps
Yeah, let me stop.
used for documentation.
Yeah, I'll stop
visit.
it. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about an example of a family goal and why it wouldn't necessarily have X's in times of day?
Yes. So why don't I just go ahead and use the example that I had here. And so outcome or goal number 7, the one I mentioned about, was Shamika, the mother, wanted to get information about inclusive preschool options. And so that is about, it's a service delivery or, yeah, service delivery kind of goal. What are her options for her child to be able to go to an inclusive preschool? And so that has no bearing on the day-to-day routines. One of the curious features of the RBI is that you're talking about children's functioning in daily routines, but so many other issues end up popping up that families bring up. And so in this instance, even though we were talking about the family's daily routines and how Jamal is functioning with his engagement, independence, and social relationships, at some point in this conversation, the mother said, I really want to know whether he can go to an inclusive preschool. And so we wrote that down in the notes, put a star next to it, and then she ended up choosing that as a goal, wanting to know what that is, but it has no routines. Let me give you a couple of other ones then. The next one was, do you remember that I mentioned that we have the time, worry, and change question near the end of the routines-based interview? Do you have enough time for yourself or yourself and another person? And it's very common for families to say, no, I do not have enough time for myself. And especially now, while they're stuck with their other family members, it's probably going to be really true. So in this instance, Shamika chose as her 8th priority that she will have 2 hours a week to spend with her best friend. And so that is not related to routine of the day. And so there you have another example of a family level goal that does not is not related to the routines of the day, so no X's go into the matrix. Do you think that answers the question, Cami?
Yes. And also, we'll review the website at the end, but this is available on the EIEIO website, a blank matrix is.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Good. Okay, so I went back a bit, so let me just go back to this. Here, okay.
The next visit should be. So the next steps form is used for documentation of the visit. It is a reminder of the commitment that the adults involved have made about what's going to happen between visits. Remember, all the intervention occurs between visits. And it is the agenda for the next visit. The agenda for the next visit will be the plan for the next visit on the bottom panel, but it will also be a review of what we did in the past week or since the previous visit. Again, I want to ask the question, who sets the agenda? It is the family that sets the agenda in our model. So to revisit...
We will revisit the principles in just a minute, but I've been making the point very strongly in this webinar about the family setting the agenda, because some of the other guidance that is out there right now has to do with professionals preparing for televisits, telepractice, teleintervention, where they are preparing and they are setting the agenda so that they can tell the family what we're going to do today. That is not consistent with the philosophy of the routines-based model. We don't tell the family what it is that we're going to do with them. We allow them to set the agenda, and we help them to do that by providing them with a matrix to remind them of what it is that they, of the goals that they set, and we also use the next steps form so that they can tell us on the previous visit what it is they would like to focus on the next visit.
The principles then, all the intervention occurs between visits, family sets the agenda, parents are competent adults, and so we work with them as partners in this process. They are not children. We use adult learning theory. We do not use pedagogy. Family consultation is how we work with families, and so that is a collaborative consultation approach, not an expert consultation approach. We don't go in there giving parents suggestions and expecting them to follow through. We go in there working with them to figure out what it is that's going to work for them and what they consider to be likely to succeed and feasible in their busy lives. We follow the two-bucket principle, which is to ensure that families are getting the resources and supports that they need to build themselves up as individuals, which then makes them more rested, prepared, and confident as parents of their children. And we provide support-based visits focusing on emotional support, material support, and informational support. So I encourage you, please, to visit www.eieio.ua.edu, where we have many materials and other information. And please do write to us at eieio@ua.edu. And you can write to us in Spanish or English, and we will reply quickly. So thank you for letting me talk.
Okay, so I said write to us in Spanish or English because we recorded this for a Spanish audience. You can write to us in any damn language you like. We know how to use Google Translate. We are now at a point where we can answer some questions from you all. There has been quite a lot of activity on the chat. I have not been able to follow it because I had to, concentrate on this great speaker who was on this video here. And so between Cami and Anna, maybe we can figure out some questions that maybe we can answer. Cami, did you see anything that popped out?
I think I've been saying, jumping in and asking some of them, some great ideas that I'm going to put you to work creating. So we'll get back to some of these. Keep an eye on the website.
Okay. I do see one from Tess Pritchard about how you sell it to families. You have to be really careful about I know what you mean by selling it to families, but we need to be really careful not to come across as trying to convince families about something or coming across as used car salespeople, because at a time of stay at home, where we're having to do it through technology, we have no choice but to build families' capacity to work with their children between our calls. And so it's actually a great opportunity for families to see the importance of what it is that they do with their children, as opposed to us coming in and doing anything specific and hands-on with the child. I'm really hoping that actually there might be a silver lining to this, because we're sort of forced in this situation.
There have been a lot of questions about perhaps doing the RBI over a few sessions, or and where you might pause it to resume to another session. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's not as good. There is something about the arc of the conversation that happens in an RBI, that the relationship builds, and you get to the time, worry, and change question. By that time, you're in love with the family, they're in love with you, and you know, a relationship has been built. If you interrupt the the interview in the middle because of time or other problems like that, you sort of have to start over again. Not right from scratch, but there's something, you lose a little bit of something in there. I don't know, Cami, do you think it's better to have two, let's say, for example, two conversations so you can dig deeply over, let's say, 4 or 5 routines, or to have a 1-hour conversation where you only get into maybe 2 or 3 routines? What do you think?
You know, I think there's pros and cons of both of them. I do balance the knowing what people are going through right now, and perhaps not having a 2-hour block of time. And I also remember what we like to say is that the RBI doesn't get at everything, but it gets at enough, and that the next visit that you're going to have virtually is going to be another mini RBI of perhaps getting, and that might even get at more outcomes. So I think it kind of depends on the situation, as although I totally agree with you that having the 2-hour block of time is a much better process to have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this also brings up the issue of the RBI is often used at the beginning of family coming in, and then at the annual review and some other times. That I'm working hard and fast to try to get some guidance out about how to do assessments to let children in. Australia isn't as obsessed with scores for children's eligibility as the United States is, although the NDIS has kind of changed some of the rules around this. And so I think it's really important that children not be denied the opportunity to get into early intervention just because we can't put our hands on them. And then, so there are 2 issues. One is the testing of children to get in, and then the other is the assessment of needs to know what it is we're going to help the families with. And so I think I agree with you that we need to think about the importance of the emotional toll on families and providers, and maybe we won't have the 2 hours and have to just make do with what we can get in the time available.
It's lucky for the places that don't always have to have the rigmarole of changing what we call in the States an IFSP or an IEP, Individual Family Service Plan. If you can make those more fluid, then it's easy to add and subtract goals. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I do see that there is a question about families not being convinced about tele-intervention. And perhaps our approach shouldn't be that we think that tele-intervention is necessarily a replacement for a visit, but it's a way to stay in touch with families. I mean, we have no choice. We can't go visit people. But we also don't want to abandon people. So even though a family might not feel that a telepractice session is the same as they would have had otherwise, then it doesn't mean that we don't actually get in touch with them. But you know, the families who are going to think that are the families who have had experience with direct hands-on therapy that actually doesn't do very much good anyway. Because children don't learn well from just from one session a week. So I feel for those families, but it doesn't mean that we cave and try to do some medical model visit.
I just wanted to, if I can, throw you some other questions that are coming through the Q&A box, if that's okay.
Yeah, good.
One of them is, I'm just going to read it as typed. So, what if you've not had the formal RBI training? Are there training opportunities or reading materials to allow us to be able to do these types of visits with families?
Okay, that's a very good question, and it's why we have developed the routines-based conversation. So the principles and methods of doing an RBI can still be done by a person who hasn't been trained to do an RBI to fidelity. And there are many posts about the RBI on the blog that I mentioned earlier, for example, and on the website that I mentioned. And so people can still take those same practices and principles and apply them, even if they haven't been trained to fidelity.
Perfect. Another one, when working with new families via Telepractice, would you suggest a time of building relationship before you do the EcoMap and RBI?
No, absolutely not. The EcoMap and the RBI are the best way of developing that relationship. So as soon as, you might have some introductory communication with them, but very quickly do an EcoMap to show that you're interested in their whole family, and do an RBI. Cami and I have done a workshop called Falling in Love Through the RBI, because we realize that when you do a good RBI, or let's call it routines-based conversation in this case, you actually, you fall in love with the family and they fall in love with you. So it is one of the best ways of kickstarting a positive relationship with the family.
Perfect. When you do manage to engage interpreters, how have you found this working with families, interpreter and the key worker?
Anna, it's really great that you're helping us with these questions.
It's so fun. I'm loving it. Looking at all the boxes.
Cami, I might let you, why don't you answer this, Cami, because you have a lot of use of interpreters in your program.
Well, as we know, with working with the interpreters, we have about half the amount of time, because it takes, the back and forth of the extra communication. But it works well. It works better than trying to work directly with the child and the parent. If you're trying to give directions to a child and be able to explain going on to the parent, then you've got the poor interpreters not knowing who to interpret for, the child or the parent. And so if you are following the model and you're speaking primarily to the caregiver, it works really well if you have them, which is our problem right now. We're out of them.
Yeah.
Yes, I will say that I've heard that interpreters' time is at a premium right now. They're being they're needed a lot all over the place, and then in a very diverse place like Portland in the United States, and Melbourne and other big metropolises. You don't have interpreters necessarily for every language. And also English is one of the most efficient languages in the world. So where it might take it actually takes more than half the time when you have to interpret into another language. It's a pain in the ass to answer your question, Anna.
Love the summary there. Another one is, so we run early intervention groups where the key element is social connections and relationships between children and adults in group settings. How can Telepractice work for social interaction versus just focusing on RBI with one individual family?
Well, obviously the group interaction is probably not happening right now, I'm assuming. And also it's important not to focus just on the RBI. The RBI is just the interview for determining what the goals are. The routines-based visits are another issue, and we haven't really delved into that very much here, but in Cami's program and in other programs, typically we are visiting, in the real world, we would be visiting children in their classrooms, or let's call those group settings. And now we can't do that. So we're having to try to figure out how to visit children in their home settings. And so some of the same principles that we've been talking about are going to apply at this time, even though we realize that that's quite different from what it would be if children were in group settings with adults or with children.
Are you okay for another question?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, sure. This is another question. So I've come across many families that have said we don't have much of a routine, more prevalent now with children being at home. So it can be difficult to determine when they can implement recommendations at home. What is your advice on working with the families? Okay.
So this is where the definition of routine becomes important, that some people think of families having a routine, meaning a predictable sequence of events that happen through the day. And we're talking, this question is about those families who don't have a predictable sequence of routine of activities happening through the day, which is true in a number of families. But every family has routines, plural, the way we're defining it. And so at some point the child wakes up, that's a routine. At some point the child has some toileting, that's a routine. At some point somebody shoves food into that child's mouth, that's a routine. At some point that child plays, that's a routine. You see what I'm saying? That every child has these different, every child and family has these different events and activities that happen through the day. And so if you're working collaboratively with the family, then we're figuring out what it is the child's functioning is like at these different times of the day, even if it's an unpredictable time, and helping the family have strategies for how to help the child participate meaningfully in that meal time, that play time, that dressing time, that toileting time, etc. So actually every family does have routines. They just might not be routine.
Thanks, Robin. Just time for one last question. And this one sort of come in various forms. So hopefully I'm answering it for a few people. Families now have lots of children at home and it can feel a little chaotic. Finding time for focus for a tele-conversation can be a little bit tricky. How do you manage lots of interruptions to keep on track?
Well, maybe throw some of the children out of the house for a while. But if that's not available, it is really a bit of an issue. You may have heard that there has been an article that has become very popular in the United States called "The Parents Are Not All Right." And this is acknowledging the fact that it's really become hard for many parents, especially parents who are trying to work from home and school their children from home, that the demands on parents right now is really huge. So that's why I was so emphatic about the point that we should put as little pressure on families as possible in terms of delivering early intervention services, early childhood intervention services to them. And so it's way beyond my scope to help families figure out for individual families how they can have a little bit of private time for the parent to be on the computer or on the phone with their early interventionist. But if we do a really good job with families, they will, the parent who is talking to us will consider that to be one of the best hours of her week or his week. And so we'll try to persuade other people to step up, if there is somebody else to step up, and allow the parent to have that that one-on-one time with the early interventionists. We don't always have to have the child for that visit, so that's a really important point to keep in mind. Cami, can you think of anything to add to that?
I would like to just do a shout out for the providers. As I'm primarily working directly with them, I hear their worries about, well, I'm not doing a good job for this family because she's got so many interruptions. I just want you guys to have some compassion for yourselves, as well as what's going on with families, because you guys are the North Star for them too. Remember those 3 things that we're there for, and know that you are all doing a wonderful job.
Great.
Before we get to some closing, I'm going to ask both of you a closing tip or a suggestion to leave with. So I'll leave that with you whilst I also ask you another question. Sorry, I lied. There's this one question that I think is really interesting and really important to ask, which is from Elaine, wondering if anyone's looked at whether adjusting the RBI to Indigenous community context is needed, or if it's structured in a way that would still inform the intervention.
That's a great question, and I love it when it comes from that part of the world, actually, because as you know, I've also done quite a bit of work in New Zealand, and we have found that the RBI, the routine-based interview specifically, is highly appreciated by people of many, many different cultures, mostly because it honors the family so much. And as you know, in Australia and with the Indigenous people there and the Maori in New Zealand, the Native Americans in the US, that the RBI really honors and respects the principle of family. In New Zealand, for example, in the EcoMap, they actually extend the EcoMap to make it vertical rather than horizontal so that they can include all of the ancestors. I'm talking about the dead ancestors in their EcoMap, because for them, they are still family. And so we have been very careful to say that we are not going to not use the RBI with different cultures, because that would be denying people an evidence-based, family-friendly practice on the basis of some characteristic of theirs. So very little has to change with different cultural groups when it comes to the RBI.
I think that's a beautiful way to start to wrap up. Thanks, Robin, around inclusiveness and the adaptability of the tool. So before we leave, is there anything that you wanted to sort of, I mean, the whole thing's just been your wisdom imparting on us all, but is there sort of one sort of take home message to everyone? I've got a new poster on my quote wall, which I'm crediting you both, which is you can't just bring the clinic and dump it on the living room floor. That's my new favourite saying. So thank you for that. That's up there. I'm going to read that daily. Robin, any final thoughts?
No, not really. I think that I am very appreciative of the efforts that have been made in Australia, especially trying to figure out how to do everything well with the NDIS regulations, and that the keeping the focus on the family and the principle that all the intervention occurs between visits. That's really important.
Yeah, we do have a long way to go in terms of getting the NDIA to recognise the true scope of what early intervention is, so that this can all be a part of it and well funded. But I think from having over 700 people join today that are passionate about it, we'll definitely get there with our advocacy. So thank you so much, Robin.
Okay.
Cami, any final points?
I would echo what Robin had mentioned, and keep doing the good work. Yeah,
thank you. And thank you both so much for joining. So that's a wrap, everyone. Thank you so much for everyone that's come today. I'm going to close it off how I started, with a collective breath, to join us all across the globe in this strange time that's also providing opportunities like this to connect. So I'm going to take a breath in and a breath out. Thank you both so much for your generosity and your time, and thank you to everyone out there in the world. We'll see you soon.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.